The fluorescent hum of the office had been the only soundtrack to my life for the last 14 hours. By the time I finally swiped my badge at the exit reader, my vision was doing that rhythmic blurring thing where the world loses itches. It was the building's version of highway hypnosis, that heavy, dangerous exhaustion where your eyes drift shut for half a second and you realize you've moved 50 feet without memory. My muscles felt like lead, and the cold air of the ventilated hallway only helped for a few minutes before the warmth of my own fatigue swallowed me whole again. I just needed to reach the lobby, get to my car, and pray the adrenaline would kick in for the drive home. The elevator lobby was empty, the marble floors polished to a mirror finish that made the harsh overhead lights look slightly off, casting long, sickly shadows that didn't seem to follow me at the right speed. I pressed the down button. The wait felt like an eternity. When the doors finally slid open with a heavy metallic groan, the interior smelled of ozone and industrial cleaner. I stepped inside and leaned my forehead against the cool stainless steel wall, closing my eyes as the car began its descent. Then came the jolt. It wasn't the smooth stop of a floor arrival, but a violent mechanical shudder that rattled my teeth. I looked at the control panel, expecting a maintenance light. Instead, I saw a button I had never noticed in 3 years of working here. It was tucked into the corner, unlabeled, glowing with a soft, pulsing amber light that looked like an old independent sign in the middle of nowhere. The elevator doors hissed open, but the lobby wasn't there. Instead, I stepped out into a hallway that looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 80s, lit by those same harsh fluorescent bulbs that made everything look slightly off. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and ozone. I shouldn't have stepped out, but I was disoriented, my heart pounding against my ribs as I looked for a stairwell. That's when I saw him. A man, maybe 50, with thinning gray hair and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days, sat behind a small, laminate desk. He didn't look up from a flickering security monitor until my shoes clicked on the linoleum. Something in his expression changed just for a second, like he was worried to see me. "You shouldn't have pressed the amber button," he said, his voice a flat, tired rasp. I started to ask how to get back to the lobby, but he held up a hand to silence me. He slid a stained napkin across the desk. On it, he had scrawled, "You're being followed. Don't go back in the elevator." My stomach dropped as he pointed to the small security screen mounted on the wall behind him. It showed the interior of the elevator I had just vacated. A figure was standing in the corner, facing the doors. They were wearing black clothes, their face lost in shadow. I spun around to look through the open doors, but the car was empty. The figure didn't show up when I looked directly. It only appeared on the camera. "I don't know what it is," the man whispered, "but I know what happens to people when they go back out there when it is waiting for them." I stood paralyzed between the man's desk and the empty elevator, my mind rejecting the image on the screen. My internal logic demanded a rational explanation, so I pulled out my phone to call building security. But the screen showed no bars, just a mocking no service icon in the corner. I looked back at the monitor. The figure in the elevator hadn't moved, but its presence felt heavier. A dark blotch on the grainy black and white feed that defied the empty reality of the car behind me. "This has to be some kind of trick," I whispered, my voice shaking as I stepped closer to the attendant's desk to inspect the equipment. I reached out to touch the frame of the monitor, half expecting to find a hidden projector or a pre-recorded tape. Instead, my eyes fell on a thick, tattered folder sitting open near his elbow. Inside were printed news articles and missing persons reports, the headlines screaming about employees who had vanished from this very building over the last 8 months. I saw the photo of a young woman with a bright smile and a middle-aged man in a suit, both reported missing after late-night shifts. The attendant leaned forward, his tired eyes tracking my movement. "They all tried to leave," he said, his voice dropping to a flat, haunting tone. "Even after I warned them, they went back to that elevator." I looked out at the hallway again, then back at the screen. On the monitor, the figure had stepped out of the elevator and was now standing exactly 10 feet behind me, facing my back. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but the hallway was still perfectly, terrifyingly empty. The contrast was dizzying. My eyes saw nothing, but the camera insisted I was seconds away from being touched. I backed away from the empty hallway, my eyes darting between the man and the monitor. I needed to believe him, but a cold, sharp instinct began to cut through my panic. I looked at the security screen again, focusing on the details I had missed. In the bottom corner, the timestamp flickered in green digits. 11:47 p.m. My heart skipped. I checked my own watch, then the clock on my phone. It was after 3 a.m. The footage wasn't a live feed of the hallway behind me. It was a loop, a high-definition live playing on a cycle to keep my eyes glued to the screen while my back was turned. I looked at the man's desk again, my perspective shifting with violent clarity. The missing persons reports weren't warnings he had collected to help others. They were trophies. The folder wasn't a record of tragedies. It was an inventory. I noticed the edge of a lanyard peeking out from under a stack of papers. It was the ID badge of the blonde woman from the article, the one who had supposedly disappeared months ago. He hadn't been protecting anyone. He'd been luring them into this dead zone floor and keeping them here until they were too exhausted to fight back. "Where is the key for the elevator?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. The attendant's tired, sympathetic expression vanished, replaced by a flat, predatory stare. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up slowly, and I realized he was much taller than he had appeared while sitting. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a length of industrial cord. The reality flipped entirely. The figure on the monitor was a ghost story used to keep the sheep from running. The wolf was standing right in front of me. I didn't wait for him to close the gap. As his hand tightened around the cord, I grabbed the heavy industrial stapler from his desk and hurled it at the monitor, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of dead pixels and sparks. He lunged, his movement surprisingly fast for a man of his age, but I had already pivoted toward the elevator. The doors were still open, a golden rectangle of false hope in the dingy hallway. I dived inside and hammered the lobby button, my fingers slick with sweat as I saw him stumbling toward the threshold, his face contorted in a silent, desperate rage. The doors groaned, moving with agonizing slowness, before finally clicking shut just as his fingers scraped against the metal. The car shuddered and began to rise, the familiar hum of the engine sounding like a choir of angels compared to the silence of that hidden floor. When I reached the lobby, I didn't stop running until I hit the sidewalk, the cold night air finally snapping me out of my trance. I sat in my car, doors locked and engine idling, as I dialed 911 with shaking hands. I told the dispatcher everything, but even as I spoke, my eyes drifted to the building's glass entrance. I could see the security desk inside, and above it, the lobby's own monitor system. The car I had just escaped was visible on the screen. My blood turned to ice. The attendant wasn't there, but the figure in black was. It wasn't on a loop this time. It was standing exactly where I had been standing, staring directly into the camera lens, as if it were looking through the screen and straight into my soul. I realized then that the attendant hadn't just been a predator. I don't know which horror was worse, but if you ever see an unlabeled button glow, just keep your eyes on the floor and wait for the lobby. Whatever is waiting on those hidden levels, you don't want to meet it.